I never thought sharing an apartment would change my life in ways I couldn't predict. When I signed the lease, I imagined the usual, splitting bills, cooking rotations, and someone to complain with about the noisy neighbors. What I didn't imagine was Daniel. Daniel moved in 3 months after I did, a transfer student who needed a place close to campus. He arrived with nothing but 2 duffel bags, a beat-up guitar case, and a smile that could disarm anyone in seconds. He was the kind of guy people noticed without meaning to: tall, relaxed, carrying an easy charm that made you want to know him. At first, our friendship grew in the way most roommates bond, through necessity. Late-night grocery runs, figuring out the temperamental shower, arguing about whose turn it was to clean the dishes. But within weeks, necessity shifted into something else. We started staying up past midnight, sprawled across the living room couch, talking about everything from music to the future. Daniel had a way of listening that made you feel like your words mattered. He also had a way of looking at me that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't obvious, never intrusive or demanding, but his gaze lingered a second too long. Once, while we sat side by side watching a film, our knees brushed. He didn't move us away, and neither did I. I told myself it was nothing, just comfort, just closeness. But a seed had been planted, and no matter how I tried to ignore it, it kept growing. Daniel was in a relationship, something he mentioned casually early on. His boyfriend, Mark, lived in another city, and from the way Daniel spoke, things weren't perfect between them. Still, he kept the details light, like he didn't want to pull back the curtain too far. One rainy evening, as the sound of drops hammered against our window, Daniel opened up more than usual. He sat hunched on the couch, guitar balanced across his knees, fingers resting silently on the strings. "Do you ever feel like you're with someone but they don't really see you?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" He sighed, plucking a single string, letting the note hang in the air. "I don't know. Mark's great, but lately it feels like we're on different planets." I try to explain how I feel, and it's like the words don't land. I shifted closer, not out of boldness, but instinct. That sounds hard. Everyone deserves to feel heard. Daniel looked at me then, and in that moment it felt like the rain outside was the only thing tethering us to reality. His eyes were tired, but behind them was something unspoken, a need, a yearning I recognized but didn't dare name. I wanted to tell him I understood, that I saw him more clearly than he knew. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch until he strummed a soft tune, a melody tinged with melancholy. Days passed, and that conversation stuck with me. Daniel's confessions began surfacing more often. Small cracks in the walls he usually kept up. He'd laugh and say he was fine, but his voice carried weight when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Our routines blurred further. He'd wander into my room late at night under the pretense of asking a quick question, then linger on the edge of my bed, talking until dawn. I'd find myself memorizing the way he gestured when excited, or how his hair fell into his eyes when he was tired. Every detail etched itself deeper into me, and with it my guilt. I had a partner of my own, Ethan. Sweet, dependable, someone who loved me without conditions. But when Ethan texted, I found myself distracted, waiting for Daniel to come home instead. When Ethan called, I muted the sound of Daniel's laughter in the background, hiding the warmth I couldn't explain. It was wrong, I knew it. Yet temptation rarely announces itself as danger. It arrives disguised as comfort, as intimacy, as the quiet assurance of being understood. One night, as I washed dishes in the dim kitchen, Daniel appeared beside me. He didn't say anything at first, just reached for a towel and began drying the plates. Our hands brushed over the same glass, and neither of us pulled away. The moment stretched, so simple, yet charged with meaning. Finally, Daniel spoke softly, almost as if he were confessing to himself rather than me. "Sometimes I think this apartment is the only place I feel like I belong." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. But I knew then that something had shifted between us. This wasn't just friendship. It wasn't just comfort. It was the start of something neither of us had asked for, but both of us felt. And as I stood there, heart pounding louder than the rain outside, I realized that what Daniel needed, and what I secretly craved, was about to pull us into a place we couldn't easily escape. It began with the smallest of excuses: a drink after a long day, a late night movie neither of us really watched, a game of cards that dissolved into laughter, so loud the neighbors thumped the wall. Each moment seemed harmless in isolation, but strung together they formed a rhythm neither Daniel nor I could ignore. The tension between us was no longer imagined. It was there in the way he leaned too close when showing me something on his phone, or how I found myself holding his gaze longer than was appropriate. The air between us seemed charged, restless, always waiting for one of us to break the unspoken pact of restraint. One Friday night, it finally happened. Daniel came home with a six-pack tucked under his arm, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. I was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling idly through messages from Ethan. I didn't reply. "Rough week?" I asked, watching as Daniel dropped the beers onto the counter. "You could say that," he muttered, opening one and taking a long drink. His eyes flicked to me, soft but weary. "Mind if I join you?" Minutes later, he was seated across from me, the table scattered with empty bottles and unfinished thoughts. The conversation shifted from light jokes to confessions that lingered. He spoke of loneliness, of feeling like he was performing for everyone else's expectations. I listened, but my chest ached because I knew exactly what he meant. At some point, his hand brushed mine across the table. This time, he didn't pull back. The touch was deliberate, his fingers curling around mine with hesitation, then with certainty. My breath caught, but I didn't let go. "Daniel," I whispered, unsure whether it was warning or invitation. His eyes locked on mine. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said quietly. And just like that, the line we had danced around for weeks dissolved. He leaned forward, closing the space between us. Our lips met, not in a sudden rush, but in something deeper, slower, like we had both been waiting for this exact moment. The kiss was tender, but beneath it lay an urgency, a hunger neither of us wanted to name. My mind screamed with guilt, Ethan's face flashing in my thoughts, the weight of betrayal already pressing on me. But my body betrayed me further, leaning closer, refusing to stop. When the kiss broke, silence swallowed the room. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the patter of rain outside, the ragged rhythm of our breathing. Daniel's hand remained clasped around mine. "This isn't fair to them," I finally said, my voice cracking. "I know," Daniel admitted. His thumb traced slow circles on my skin. "But it feels real, doesn't it?" It did. Too real. That night, neither of us confessed love, but the intimacy between us deepened in ways words could not contain. We sat together until dawn, our hands never parting, our closeness crossing every boundary friendship once held. In the days that followed, secrecy became our silent language. When Ethan called, I stepped into the hallway, heart pounding, pretending nothing had changed. When Mark visited in passing conversations, Daniel's tone faltered, but he quickly covered it with casual laughter. Outwardly, life remained normal. Inwardly, everything had shifted. Daniel grew bolder in private moments. His shoulder pressed into mine as we cooked dinner. His fingers brushed my wrist as he passed me the remote. At night, he'd linger in my doorway, eyes searching for permission he no longer needed. But with every shared glance and every stolen touch, guilt carved deeper into me. I loved Ethan, or at least I told myself I did. Yet, the love I had for him now seemed muted compared to the fire Daniel ignited in me. It wasn't about passion alone, it was about being seen, understood in ways Ethan never seemed to manage. The night everything broke further was simple. Daniel had been practicing on his guitar, a soft melody drifting through the living room. I sat on the couch, eyes closed, letting the music wash over me. When the final chord faded, he set the guitar aside and sat beside me. "Too close. I don't want this to be a mistake," he said, voice low. My heart raced. "Then what do we call it?" He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek with a tenderness that silenced every protest I should have voiced. "Maybe the truth." And with those words, I let him kiss me again, this time without hesitation, without excuse. The guilt didn't vanish, but it dulled beneath the intensity of being wanted so completely. That night, I realized we had stepped into a place from which there was no simple return. The door to our old friendship had closed, and before us stretched a path built on secrecy, desire, and betrayal. I should have pulled away. I should have chosen honesty. But as his arms wrapped around me, all I chose was him. The morning after our second kiss, the apartment felt different. It wasn't just the silence or the way Daniel avoided eye contact. It was the awareness that we had crossed a threshold and could never return. I brewed coffee, staring at the steam curling upward, wishing it could erase the heaviness pressing down on my chest. Ethan called while I stood in the kitchen. His voice was warm, familiar, tethering me to a life I was suddenly unsure belonged to me. I answered with rehearsed enthusiasm, pretending everything was the same. But Daniel's footsteps sounded in the hallway, and when our eyes met, the lie in my voice echoed louder than Ethan's words. Living together became a tightrope walk. We were careful in daylight, careful when friends visited, careful when Ethan texted to say he might stop by. But in the late hours when the apartment dimmed and the world shrank to just the two of us, caution fell away. We spoke in whispers, touched in shadows, and clung to each other as though secrecy itself was a form of intimacy. Yet guilt was relentless. Every time Daniel's hand brushed mine, I thought of Ethan's trust. Every time I kissed Daniel goodnight, I imagined Mark's name on the other end of Daniel's unanswered calls. What we shared burned bright, but it also consumed, leaving ashes in its wake. The breaking point came on a Sunday afternoon. Ethan surprised me with a visit, carrying groceries and that easy smile that once felt like home. Daniel was sprawled on the couch, guitar in hand, but when he saw Ethan, he stiffened. The room filled with tension, so thick it seemed impossible to breathe. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. Everything okay? He asked, his eyes flicking between us. Yeah, I said too quickly. Just tired. But Ethan's gaze lingered on Daniel, on the way he avoided looking at us, on the awkward silence where there should have been ease. Later, when Ethan and I were alone in my room, he asked the question I had dreaded. Are you sure there's nothing going on between you two? I hesitated. That pause, brief as it was, answered him more loudly than words ever could. Ethan's face fell. He didn't yell, didn't accuse. Instead, he looked at me with a quiet devastation that cut deeper than anger ever could. I trusted you, he whispered. And those 3 words felt heavier than any argument. When he left that evening, he didn't slam the door. He just closed it softly, like someone shutting the cover of a book they couldn't bear to finish. Daniel found me later, sitting in the darkened living room. His expression mirrored my own, guilt, fear, a strange mix of longing and regret. He knows, doesn't he? Daniel asked. I nodded, unable to speak. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Daniel sat beside me, his hand hovering before settling on mine. I didn't mean for this to happen, he said, quietly. But I can't regret it, not when it felt so real. His honesty was both a balm and a blade. I wanted to believe him, to hold onto the connection that had reshaped me. But I also knew what it had cost. Ethan's trust, Mark's trust, and maybe, in the end, our own peace of mind. In the weeks that followed, the apartment grew colder. Daniel and I still shared glances, still brushed shoulders in passing, but something had broken. The secrecy that once bound us now suffocated us. We had built something fragile on a foundation of betrayal, and it was crumbling beneath the weight of reality. One night, I found Daniel sitting on the balcony, staring into the city lights. He didn't turn when I stepped beside him. Maybe we weren't meant to last, he said softly. Maybe we were just what each other needed in the moment. His words lingered, heavy with truth. I wanted to argue, to insist that what we shared was more than a passing storm. But deep down, I knew he was right. When Daniel finally moved out, the apartment felt impossibly empty. His laughter no longer filled the rooms, his guitar no longer hummed through the walls. Yet Even in his absence, he remained etched into the space we once shared, and into me. I still think about him. About the way he looked at me that first night on the couch, about the confession that started it all, about the kiss that unraveled everything I thought I knew about myself. I don't know if what we had was love, or if it was just loneliness disguised as passion. But I know this, it changed me. It made me question loyalty, desire, and the fragile lines we draw to keep ourselves safe. And when I close my eyes at night, I sometimes hear Daniel's voice, soft, vulnerable, unforgettable, saying the words that pulled me into a world I can never escape. I don't want to pretend anymore. When Daniel left, silence became my new roommate. The apartment that once pulsed with late-night conversations and the strum of his guitar now echoed with absence. I tried filling the emptiness with music, with friends, with the steady rhythm of work and study, but nothing replaced the quiet void he left behind. Ethan didn't return my calls. His last message was polite, but final. I need time, and I don't think I can give you what you're asking for anymore. Reading it, I realized he wasn't asking for time, he was closing the door. I had broken something that couldn't be repaired, and no apology would rewrite what I had done. In the weeks that followed, I caught myself reaching for 2 cups when making coffee out of habit. I would glance toward the couch, expecting to see Daniel slouched with his guitar, humming softly to himself. Instead, the cushions remained empty, untouched, a constant reminder of what I had lost. Not just him, but the version of myself I used to recognize. At night, the memories returned with cruel clarity. The first touch across the kitchen table. The kiss that rewrote the boundaries of our friendship. The whispered words in the dark. I don't want to pretend anymore. They haunted me, not because they were lies, but because they were true. And truth, once revealed, can't be buried again. I tried to convince myself it had all been a mistake, a moment of weakness. But deep down I knew better. It was real, messy, painful, destructive, but real. Daniel had seen me in ways no one else had, and even though the cost was unbearable, I couldn't erase the way he made me feel. One evening, unable to sit with my thoughts any longer, I walked through the city streets we had once wandered together. I passed the cafe where we joked about overpriced lattes, the bookstore where he lingered over music magazines, the park bench where he confessed he felt invisible in his own relationship. Each place felt haunted by his presence, as though the city itself remembered what we had shared. I stopped at the riverfront, staring at the rippling water. It struck me that love, or whatever fragile version of it Daniel and I had, wasn't always about permanence. Sometimes it arrived like a storm. Fierce, consuming, and gone before you realized how much it had changed the landscape. You couldn't live in the storm forever, but you could never forget it either. Slowly, I began to understand that what I needed wasn't Daniel, or even Ethan, it was clarity. I had to face the part of myself that allowed desire to outweigh honesty, that craved comfort at the cost of trust. That truth was harder to sit with than loneliness, but it was necessary. Weeks turned into months. I saw Daniel once, by chance, across a crowded bar. He looked older somehow, more guarded, though his smile, when he noticed me, was soft. We didn't speak. There was no grand reunion, no desperate attempt to reclaim what we lost. Just a brief acknowledgement, a silent recognition of what had been and what could never be again. Back in the apartment, I finally rearranged the furniture. I moved the couch to a different wall, donated the mismatched mugs we used to fight over, replaced the curtains Daniel had insisted were too plain. It wasn't about erasing him, it was about reclaiming the space as my own. About learning to live without the ghost of our choices pressing against every wall. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear his laughter, his guitar, his whispered confessions. But I've stopped wishing for what might have been. Instead, I carry those memories like scars, not ugly, not beautiful, just proof of where I've been. Because in the end, Daniel didn't ruin me, and Ethan didn't define me. What defined me was the choice I finally made to stop hiding from myself, to accept that love, desire, and betrayal had all shaped me, and that healing meant facing the wreckage, not running from it. And maybe someday I'll find someone who sees me the way Daniel once did, but this time I'll choose to love them without secrecy, without betrayal. This time, I'll choose differently.